A pregnant woman collapses in the middle of her own divorce hearing. The air is sucked out of the oak-paneled courtroom. But her husband, the man she built a life with, doesn't move a muscle. His beautiful younger mistress simply smirks from the gallery, a picture of smug victory. They think they've won. They think they've broken her, and are moments away from taking everything. But they have no idea about the single sealed envelope the judge is holding. A DNA test that won't just reveal the father of the baby, but will unravel a lie that has built an entire empire. The air in courtroom 4B was thick with a toxic blend of antiseptic cleaner and silent animosity. It clung to the heavy wooden benches and seeped into the fabric of Jessica Collins's maternity dress, making her feel suffocated. At 7 months pregnant, every sensation was amplified: the unrelenting hardness of the bench against her spine, the low-frequency hum of the fluorescent lights, and most of all, the piercing stare of her husband Daniel from across the room. He sat beside his lawyer, a shark in a $1,000 suit named Robert Peterson. Daniel was the picture of calm, composed control. His jaw was set, his shoulders were back, and his custom-tailored suit looked like it had been molded to his athletic frame. He was handsome, devastatingly so, and he was using that charm as a weapon, offering the judge a placid, reasonable expression that masked the monster beneath. Jessica's gaze, however, was unwillingly drawn past him to the first row of the public gallery. There sat Victoria Beaumont. She was everything Jessica wasn't right now. Young, slender, with hair the color of spun gold, and a predatory stillness. She wore a tight crimson dress that was both wildly inappropriate for a courtroom and a deliberate screaming statement of her victory. And she was smiling. It wasn't a broad, joyful smile. It was a small, sharp, knowing smirk that was aimed directly at Jessica, a tiny, vicious twist of her painted lips. That smile said, "I have him. I have his future. I'm sitting where you should be, and soon I'll have your money too." "Mrs. Collins," her own lawyer. Olivia Chen whispered, her voice a sharp anchor in the swirling vortex of Jessica's nausea. "Focus. Judge Atwood is speaking." Jessica blinked, forcing herself to look at the woman on the bench. Judge Margaret Atwood was in her late 50s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for being as tough as she was fair. She peered over her spectacles, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your client, Mr. Collins, is contesting paternity of the unborn child, and is therefore petitioning to have all marital assets frozen, pending a full forensic accounting under the assumption of marital infidelity on the part of Mrs. Collins. Is that a correct summary of your motion?" "It is, Your Honor," Peterson said, rising smoothly. "My client has significant reason to believe he is not the biological father of the child Mrs. Collins is carrying. He has been a faithful and dedicated husband, and this revelation has been a source of profound emotional and personal distress." A bitter, hysterical laugh almost escaped Jessica's throat. "Faithful's dedicated." The words were so absurd, so diametrically opposed to the reality of the past year that she felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the baby kick a small, insistent flutter against her ribs, as if he too could sense the injustice. "And what is this significant reason, Mr. Peterson?" Judge Atwood asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Mr. Collins will testify that Mrs. Collins's behavior became erratic and secretive in the months leading up to the alleged conception. She was distant, often away from home for unexplained periods. He is heartbroken to conclude that she must have sought comfort elsewhere." It was a masterclass in slander, delivered with a somber, regretful tone. Jessica looked at Daniel, pleading with her eyes for him to stop this, to show an ounce of the decency she once believed he possessed. He met her gaze for a half-second, and his eyes were not angry or sad. They were chillingly empty. He was a stranger. Olivia Chen stood up. "Your Honor, this is a baseless and despicable accusation. It is nothing more than a cruel tactic by Mr. Collins to avoid his financial and parental responsibilities. My client, Jessica Collins, has been a loyal wife and partner for 8 years. She put her own career as a promising architect on hold to support Mr. Collins as he built his real estate empire. These allegations are pure fiction designed to humiliate her and deny his child his birthright. The proof, as they say, will be in the pudding," Peterson countered smugly. "We have formally requested a court-ordered prenatal paternity test. If Mrs. Collins has nothing to hide, she should have no objection." From the gallery, Victoria's smirk widened. This was their checkmate. They knew Jessica had no money of her own. Daniel had made sure of that, systematically cutting off her access to their joint accounts the day he served her with divorce papers. They were banking on her being too poor, too broken, and too ashamed to fight. They thought they could slander her name, steal her future, and leave her with nothing but a child they would label a bastard. "My client has already consented to the test, Your Honor." Olivia said, her voice firm and clear. "The results were delivered to this court by the lab this morning. We are fully prepared to have them read into the record." A flicker of surprise crossed Peterson's face. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They hadn't expected this. They had expected a fight delays a tearful refusal that would make her look guilty. They hadn't expected calm, swift compliance. From her seat, Victoria leaned forward almost imperceptibly, her blue eyes fixed on the judge's bench, where a single sealed manila envelope lay. The smile was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, predatory focus. This was the moment. Judge Atwood picked up the envelope. Her gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on Jessica, then on Daniel, and finally on Victoria. "The court has in its possession the results of the DNA analysis comparing samples from the fetus and Mr. Daniel Collins." The silence was absolute. Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet hall. She knew the truth, of course, but the sheer audacity of Daniel's lie had planted a seed of terror in her mind. What if something went wrong? What if they'd somehow tampered with the results? Her world had been upended so completely that anything felt possible. She chanced one last look at Victoria. The blonde was no longer looking at the judge. She was looking directly at Jessica again, and as the judge began to tear open the seal on the envelope, Victoria's lips curved back into that same vicious, triumphant smile. It was the smile that broke her. It was the final crushing weight of the cruelty, the gaslighting, the utter betrayal. The smug certainty of the woman who had stolen her husband her life and was now enjoying the spectacle of her complete and utter destruction. The room began to tilt. The judge's voice became a distant, echoing boom. Black spots danced in Jessica's vision, coalescing at the edges. She felt the baby give another sharp kick, a final urgent warning. Her hand, which had been gripping the table, slipped. She made a small, gasping sound, trying to draw in a breath that wouldn't come. Olivia turned, her professional composure vanishing, replaced by alarm. "Jessica?" But Jessica couldn't answer. The floor rushed up to meet her as the world dissolved into a silent, suffocating darkness. Her last conscious thought was of that smile burned into her mind like a brand. The pregnant woman had fainted in court, and the mistress was still smiling. 8 years ago, the world had been a kaleidoscope of brilliant color. Jessica remembered the exact shade of blue in Daniel's eyes, the day he proposed to her on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Pacific. He'd dropped to one knee, the wind whipping his dark hair, and presented her with a ring that wasn't ostentatious, but elegant and perfect, just like he seemed to be. He'd spoken of a future built together, a partnership, a legacy. She a rising star at a prestigious architectural firm, and he a junior vice president at his father's lucrative real estate development company, Collins & Son Properties. "We'll build an empire, Jess," he had said, his voice filled with a sincerity that she had clung to like a life raft. "You design the world, and I'll build it." The first few years were idyllic, a carefully curated montage of success. Jessica's innovative designs won accolades, and Daniel, with his sharp business acumen and ruthless ambition, climbed the corporate ladder with astonishing speed. They bought a beautiful glass-walled house in the hills, a testament to her design philosophy and his financial success. Their life was the envy of their friends, a perfect couple, a perfect home, a perfect future stretching out before them. The shift was subtle at first, a slow cooling she barely registered. After his father, Arthur Collins, passed away from a sudden heart attack 4 years into their marriage, Daniel inherited the entire company. The weight of being the sole son in Collins & Son Properties changed him. The ambition that had once been exhilarating became something harder, more obsessive. "The board is pushing for a more aggressive quarter," he'd say, coming home long after she'd gone to bed. "I have to be there. Dad built this from nothing. I can't be the one to let it falter." Jessica, ever the supportive wife, took him at his word. She scaled back her own projects, telling herself it was temporary. She started managing their home-hosting dinner parties for his business associates, and becoming the gracious, smiling woman on the arm of the brilliant CEO. She was playing a part, she realized one day, and she'd forgotten how to leave the stage. Her drafting table gathered dust in the home office he had slowly co-opted for his own paperwork. The late nights became more frequent. The business trips stretched from 2 days to 5. When he was home, he was distant, his phone a permanent extension of his hand angled away from her with a new reflexive secrecy. The easy intimacy they once shared evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal distance. He would compliment her dress, but his eyes wouldn't really see her. He would ask about her day, but would be scrolling through emails before she could answer. The first concrete crack in her denial came 6 months before the divorce papers. It was an earring. A single diamond and sapphire drop earring nestled deep in the passenger seat cushion of his car. It wasn't hers. Jessica's style was minimalist modern. This was expensive, flashy, and utterly foreign. When she confronted him holding the glittering jewel in her trembling palm, he didn't even flinch. He laughed. "Oh, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Robert Peterson's wife, Melinda, was in the car last week. We were coming back from that charity gala. It must be hers. I'll have my assistant send it back to her." He was so smooth, so plausible, that for a moment she almost believed him. But there was a coldness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a flicker of something calculating and contemptuous. He wasn't just lying. He was insulted that she'd even dared to ask. He was gaslighting her, making her feel foolish and paranoid for noticing the evidence of his betrayal. That night, for the first time in their marriage, he slept in the guest room. He said he had an early conference call and didn't want to wake her. The gulf between them had become a chasm. Then came the discovery that shattered everything. He was in the shower, and his phone, usually guarded like a state secret, buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. A name flashed on the screen, Victoria B. A string of messages followed one after the other, each one a dagger in Jessica's heart. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. That stuffy old house must feel like a prison. You belong with me. When are you finally going to leave her? You promised. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. She scrolled up her hands, shaking so badly she could barely control her thumb. There were months of messages. Pictures. Victoria blonde and laughing on a boat that Jessica recognized as Daniel's. Victoria, in a slinky dress, at a restaurant Jessica had wanted to try for their anniversary, an anniversary Daniel had claimed he had to miss for a business trip to Singapore. Victoria wrapped in what looked like Daniel's hotel bathrobe, a skyline Jessica didn't recognize behind her. The betrayal was so absolute, so extensive, it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't a fling. It was a whole other life. He was living a life from which she had been completely and deliberately excluded. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. An icy calm settled over her. When he walked out of the bathroom, a towel slung around his waist. She was sitting on the bed, his phone in her hand. The mask of the devoted husband fell away instantly. There was no apology, no remorse. There was only annoyance, as if she had committed the ultimate transgression by uncovering his secret. "You went through my phone," he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Who is she, Daniel?" "It's none of your business," he snarled, snatching the phone from her. "This is what happens when you get paranoid and insecure, Jess. You go looking for trouble, and you find it." The argument that followed was the ugliest of her life. He twisted everything, turning his infidelity into her failure. She was too focused on her hobby of architecture. She wasn't spontaneous enough. She didn't support his ambitions. She'd let herself go. Each word was a calculated strike, designed to shatter her self-worth. It was during that fight, in a moment of pure, desperate defiance, that she told him she was pregnant. They had been trying for over a year with no success. She had found out only 2 weeks prior, and had been waiting for the perfect moment to tell him, hoping it would be the good news that could heal the growing rift between them. She watched his face, praying for a flicker of the man she had married. For a moment she saw something. Shock, confusion. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. "Pregnant," he repeated the word, tasting like poison in his mouth. He looked her up and down, his eyes filled with a terrifying new suspicion. "And you're telling me this now?" 2 days later, she was served with divorce papers. The grounds were irreconcilable differences. And 2 weeks after that, the amended petition arrived. He was formally denying paternity and accusing her of adultery. He had taken the most beautiful secret of her life and twisted it into the ugliest of weapons to be used against her. He wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her, to rewrite their history, and paint her as the villain, leaving him and his beautiful mistress free to live the life they had stolen. The gilded cage had become a torture chamber, and Daniel was holding the key, intent on locking her in forever. Jessica woke to the sharp, sterile smell of rubbing alcohol and the rhythmic beep of a machine next to her head. A soft, gentle hand was stroking her hair. She pried her heavy eyelids open to see Olivia Chen's face, etched with concern. "Hey," Olivia said softly. "You're at the courthouse infirmary. You fainted. You gave us all a scare." The courtroom. The smirk. The envelope. It all came rushing back, and Jessica tried to sit up, a panicked gasp escaping her. "The results. Did the judge read them?" "Shh, easy," Olivia soothed, gently, pushing her back down onto the stiff cot. The judge called a recess immediately. She postponed the reading. "She was more concerned about you and the baby. The paramedics checked you both out. Your blood pressure is high and you're dehydrated, but the baby's heartbeat is strong. You're both fighters." Relief washed over Jessica, so potent it felt like weakness. It was a temporary reprieve, a pause button on her public execution. He didn't even look at me, did he? Jessica whispered, the memory of Daniel's frozen posture clear in her mind. When I fell. He didn't move. Olivia's expression tightened. No, Jessica. He didn't. His lawyer and the other woman. They looked annoyed at the delay. That's all. The cruelty of it was a fresh wound. It solidified a truth that had been slowly dawning on her. The Daniel she had loved was gone, or perhaps had never truly existed at all. The man in that courtroom was a predator, and she was his prey. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Daniel, through his lawyer, played his hand with brutal efficiency. Citing the stress of the ongoing litigation and uncertainty, he successfully filed an emergency motion to freeze all their joint assets. The credit cards Jessica used for groceries were declined. The automatic payment for her car lease was rejected. She received an eviction notice from the condo Daniel had rented for her after kicking her out of their marital home, a sterile, soulless place he was now legally no longer paying for. He was strangling her financially, trying to force her into a quick, cheap settlement where she would sign away her rights for pennies on the dollar just to survive. It was a siege. He was starving her out. Jessica spent a frantic afternoon on the phone with her parents, a retired teacher and a librarian in Ohio. They were horrified, of course, and immediately wired her what they could from their modest savings. It was enough to keep a roof over her head and food in the fridge for a month, maybe 2, but the shame burned. She was 34 years old, a once successful architect, now completely dependent on her parents' retirement fund. It was during a tearful call with her younger sister Megan, a fiercely practical nurse, that the spark of defiance was reignited. "You can't let him do this, Jess," Megan said, her voice steely with anger. "He's not just divorcing you, he's trying to destroy you. You can't just defend yourself. You have to fight back. There has to be something. Men like Daniel, men with that much ego and money, they always have secrets. You just have to find the right stone to turn over." Hanging up the phone, Jessica looked around the generic beige-walled condo. It was a prison designed by her husband. She thought of her baby, of the life she wanted to give him, a life free from the shadow of this monstrous man. Megan was right. She couldn't play defense anymore. Daniel had started this war, but she was going to finish it. The next day, she walked into Olivia Chen's office with a new fire in her eyes. Olivia, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her early 40s, had taken the case pro bono after a mutual friend had made the introduction, moved by the injustice of Jessica's situation. "He's trying to bleed me dry," Jessica said, her voice devoid of the quavering fear it had held before. "He thinks if he makes me desperate enough, I'll sign anything. He's wrong." Olivia leaned forward, a pen poised over a legal pad. "I agree. A defensive strategy isn't going to cut it. We know the paternity test will prove the baby is his. That will get you child support. But to get a fair settlement, to get what you are owed for 8 years of marriage and professional sacrifice, we need leverage. He's hidden his money, I'm sure of it. Shell corporations, offshore accounts. It's a classic rich man's divorce playbook." "We need a forensic accountant," Jessica stated. "We do," Olivia confirmed. "A good one. But they're expensive. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars just to start." Jessica's heart sank. It was money she didn't have. "So what do we do?" Olivia tapped her pen for a long moment, her eyes narrowed in thought. "We can petition the court to have Daniel's assets pay for the accountant, arguing it's a necessary expense for discovery. With his public slander of you, Judge Atwood might be inclined to grant it. But it's not a guarantee. We need something else. Something personal. You were married to him for 8 years, Jessica. You lived in that house, you saw his business dealings up close. Think, was there anything that ever struck you as odd? Anything he was intensely private about. Jessica closed her eyes, forcing herself to walk back through the memories, pushing past the pain, and looking for details. She thought about his office, the one she was never allowed to enter when he was working. The locked file cabinet in the corner. His obsessive privacy about his family history. Daniel's father, Arthur Collins, had been a hard, domineering man who had built the company from scratch. His mother, Eleanor, was a quiet, nervous woman who seemed to live in her husband's shadow. Eleanor and Daniel had a strained, almost non-existent relationship. After Arthur's death, Eleanor had moved to a retirement community in Florida and cut off contact with her son almost entirely. Jessica had only met her a handful of times, and the woman had always seemed afraid. His mother, Jessica said slowly, her eyes snapping open. Eleanor, they don't speak. After his father died, she just vanished from his life. He always said she was fragile and couldn't handle the stress of his world. But there was a time at Arthur's funeral. She said something strange to me. What did she say? Olivia pressed, leaning in. We were at the reception. Daniel was holding court, accepting condolences like he was accepting an award. Eleanor grabbed my arm. She looked terrified. She whispered, "He's not like his father. Thank God for that. Arthur had a cruel heart, but Daniel has a hole where his heart should be. Be careful, my dear. The foundation of this house is built on a lie." Olivia's pen stopped moving. The foundation of this house is built on a lie. What did you think she meant? At the time, I thought she was just a grieving, rambling widow. I thought this house meant the family, their emotional state. But she was looking at the portrait of Arthur on the wall when she said it. The official company portrait. What if she meant the company Collins & Son? A thrilling, dangerous idea began to form. What if the lie wasn't just marital? What if it was older, bigger? Olivia, Jessica said, her voice trembling with the audacity of her thought. The paternity test for our baby. It compares the baby's DNA to Daniel's. What if we could compare Daniel's DNA to his father's? Olivia stared at her, her sharp legal mind instantly processing the implications. Arthur Collins is deceased. How could we get a sample? When he had his first heart attack 2 years before he died, he was treated at St. Jude's Medical Center. They did extensive tests, biopsies. They would still have his tissue samples in their pathology archives, Jessica remembered. I signed some of the paperwork for his admission. It was a long shot, a wild, improbable stab in the dark based on the cryptic words of a frightened old woman. But it was the first stone. And Jessica had a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty that if she could just turn it over, the entire rotten foundation of Daniel's world would come crumbling down. Getting a judge to sign a subpoena for the medical records of a dead man based on the cryptic utterance of an estranged mother was a monumental task. Robert Peterson fought it with everything he had, calling it a disgusting, ghoulish fishing expedition, and a desperate attempt by a scorned woman to harass a grieving son. In the preliminary hearing, he was slick and condescending. Your Honor, Mrs. Collins is clearly unwell. She fainted in court. Now she comes to you with this conspiracy theory pulled from a soap opera. She wants to desecrate the memory of Arthur Collins, a titan of this city, all to distract from her own infidelity. But Olivia Chen was his match. She stood before Judge Atwood, her presence calm and commanding. Your Honor, Olivia argued, the entire premise of Mr. Collins's case against my client rests on a question of blood of lineage. He has publicly and callously questioned the parentage of his own unborn child to gain a financial advantage. He has made genetics the central theme of this divorce. All we are asking is to apply that same standard of scrutiny to the lineage that grants him his own immense wealth and power. She let that hang in the air for a moment. Collins & Son Properties is a family business passed from father to son. The vast majority of Mr. Collins's personal wealth is tied up in a family trust, a trust whose charter I am sure is predicated on direct biological succession. If Mr. Collins believes parentage is so critically important when it comes to his responsibilities, shouldn't it be equally important when it comes to his privileges? We are not desecrating a memory, Your Honor. We are seeking the whole truth in a case where my opponent has been content to deal only in slanderous half-truths. Judge Atwood listened. Her fingers steepled her eyes, unreadable. She looked from Olivia's earnest face to Peterson's indignant one. She looked at Daniel, who sat rigid with fury. Then she looked at Jessica, who met her gaze without flinching. "Motion granted," the judge said, her voice flat. "St. Jude's Medical Center will be subpoenaed for any and all biological materials belonging to the deceased Arthur Collins. The lab will run a Y chromosome STR analysis comparing the samples of Arthur Collins to Daniel Collins. The results will be delivered directly to this court and will be read along with the results of the prenatal paternity test when we reconvene." She struck her gavel once. "This court is adjourned." The victory was intoxicating but terrifying. Jessica and Olivia had pushed the button. Now they had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. While they waited for the new court date and the lab results, they went to work. Olivia managed to get the court to approve the forensic accountant, arguing that Daniel's own challenge to the child's legitimacy made a full accounting essential. The man they hired was a quiet, balding genius named Michael Finch, who spoke of spreadsheets and ledgers with the passion of a poet. "The money is the ghost in the machine," he told Jessica during their first meeting in Olivia's small conference room. "It's never really gone. It just changes shape, moves through walls. My job is to find its shadow." For days, Jessica sat with Michael, piecing together the financial skeleton of her marriage. She brought him old bank statements she'd found, recalled names of business partners, and described trips Daniel had taken. It was painstaking, emotionally draining work. Every credit card statement was a map of Daniel's secret life with Victoria. A charge for a $5,000 necklace from a jeweler in New York. A $7,500 charge for a weekend at a luxury spa in Napa. A $10,000 wire transfer to a bank in the Cayman Islands with the memo, V. Beaumont, design consultation. "This is her," Jessica said, her finger tracing the name on the statement. "Victoria Beaumont. She's an interior designer. He must have claimed he was hiring her for a project." Michael typed furiously. "A tale as old as time. Inflated invoices, phantom consultation fees. It's a classic way to move marital assets to a third party before a divorce. It's traceable but messy." While Michael chased the money, Jessica tried to chase the other ghost, Eleanor Collins. She found the number for the retirement community in Boca Raton. The first 3 times she called Eleanor hung up the moment she heard Jessica's voice. On the 4th try, Jessica spoke quickly, a torrent of words before the click of the receiver. "Eleanor, please don't hang up. It's Jessica. Daniel is trying to take my baby. He's telling the court that his son isn't his. He's trying to leave me with nothing. You told me the foundation of the house was built on a lie. Please, I need to know what you meant. I'm fighting for my child's future." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, filled only with the faint, crackling static of a long-distance call. Jessica could hear the shaky, shallow breaths of the older woman. "He was always such a cold boy," Eleanor finally whispered, her voice frail as old parchment. "Even as a child. He didn't get that from me. He got that from Arthur, or the man I let him believe was his father." Jessica's heart stopped. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" Another long pause. "Arthur was a sterile man." Eleanor said the words coming out in a pained rush, a confession she had held for over 40 years. "An illness as a young man. He could never have children. But he needed an heir. His ego, his pride. The son in Collins and Son had to exist. It was his obsession. He was a cruel man, Jessica. He arranged it. Arranged what? Jessica breathed, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. He found a donor, a young man at the university. Smart, healthy. It was all very clinical, anonymous. Arthur made me. He forced me to go through with it. It was a business transaction to him. The price of my comfortable life was to produce his heir. I was young, and I was terrified of him. I did what he said. Daniel was born and Arthur claimed him. The young man was paid and he disappeared. No one ever knew. Daniel doesn't know. He believes with all his soul that he is the blood heir to the Collins empire. The world tilted on its axis for the second time in a month. This was the lie. The foundational, earth-shattering lie upon which Daniel had built his entire identity, his arrogance, his entitlement. He worshipped the memory of the father who had built the company, a man who wasn't even his father. Who was the donor? Eleanor. Do you have a name? No, she whimpered. Arthur handled everything. He burned all the records. He said the secret would die with the two of us. I never thought Daniel would become so much like him. The same cruelty, the same need to control everything. After the call, Jessica sat in stunned silence for a full hour. The DNA test wasn't a long shot anymore. It was a ticking time bomb placed directly under Daniel's throne. The day before the court date, Michael Finch called. I found it, he said, a note of triumph in his quiet voice. It's clever, I'll give him that. He set up a blind trust in the British Virgin Islands with Victoria Beaumont as the sole beneficiary upon a triggering event. The triggering event. The finalization of his divorce from you. He's funneled over $15 million into it over the last 8 months. It's almost all of the liquid marital assets. He was planning on leaving you with the house which is mortgaged to the hilt and a mountain of debt. Jessica felt a cold fury. He wasn't just leaving her. He was orchestrating a complete financial annihilation. We have him, don't we? She asked. On the money, yes? Michael confirmed. We can prove fraudulent conveyance. But what you have with this DNA business, that's something else entirely. You're not just going after his money, Mrs. Collins. You're going after his name. And as she prepared for court the next day, Jessica knew that was the entire point. He had tried to steal her child's name and legitimacy. Now she was about to watch as the truth did the exact same thing to him. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B was even more charged than before. The recess had allowed the drama to marinate, and the room was buzzing with a low murmur of anticipation. Reporters sensing a bigger story than a typical high society divorce had taken up a few spots in the back of the gallery. Robert Peterson and Daniel Collins sat at their table projecting an aura of bored impatience, as if this whole affair were a theatrical nuisance they were being forced to endure. Daniel looked immaculate as always, but Jessica noticed a tiny pulsing muscle in his jaw. A tell. He was not as calm as he appeared. The subpoena for his father's medical records had clearly rattled him, an unexpected move that had breached the walls of his carefully constructed fortress. Across the gallery, Victoria Beaumont was back in her seat. Today she wore a sleek black dress, an outfit of mock solemnity. The smug smirk, however, was still firmly in place. To her, this was just the final act of a play where her victory was already scripted. She caught Jessica's eye and gave a subtle, insolent wink. In that moment, Jessica felt not a flicker of pain or intimidation, only a profound, pitying contempt. Victoria thought she was about to become the queen of a vast empire, but she had no idea she was sitting on the edge of a sinkhole. Jessica herself felt transformed. She was no longer the trembling victim who had collapsed on the floor. In the past weeks, she had become a warrior. The fight for her son's future, combined with the earth-shattering secret she now held, had forged a core of steel within her. Her movements were deliberate, her back was straight. She sat beside Olivia Chen, not as a client needing protection, but as a partner in a strategy about to come to fruition. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Atwood entered and took her seat, her face as stern and impassive as ever. She surveyed the room, her gaze resting for a moment on the 2 sealed envelopes on her desk. They seemed to pulsate with the secrets they contained. "We are reconvened in the matter of Collins versus Collins," the judge began, her voice resonating with authority. Before the recess, the court was prepared to read the results of a court-ordered paternity test. Subsequently, the court also ordered a Y chromosome analysis to be performed. The accredited lab has delivered both sets of results, and they have been in the sole possession of this court. I will now unseal them and read them into the official record. A hush fell over the room. It was so quiet, Jessica could hear the soft whirring of the clock on the wall, each tick a countdown to detonation. Judge Atwood picked up the first envelope, the one concerning the paternity of Jessica's baby. She slid a letter opener beneath the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper within. The silence stretched, becoming taut and unbearable. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his mask of indifference slipping into one of keen interest. Victoria held her breath. Regarding the paternity of the male fetus carried by Mrs. Jessica Collins, the judge read her voice clear and unwavering. The analysis compared the fetal DNA profile to the DNA profile of Mr. Daniel Collins. The results are as follows. The probability of paternity is 99.9999%. She looked up from the paper directly at Daniel. Mr. Collins, according to the state's highest scientific standards, you are the father of this child. A collective exhale swept through the room. Olivia Chen reached over and gave Jessica's hand a firm, triumphant squeeze. Jessica felt a wave of validation so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes, but she willed them back. This was only the first battle. Daniel's face was a stony mask, but a flush of angry red crept up his neck. Robert Peterson whispered furiously in his ear, likely reassuring him that this changed nothing, that child support was merely a financial nuisance they could manage. Victoria's confident smirk faltered for the first time. It was replaced by a flicker of pure, undiluted annoyance. This complicated the clean break she had envisioned. A child was a permanent link, a recurring financial and emotional drain that would tether Daniel however slightly to the woman she had worked so hard to displace. Still, she recomposed herself quickly. The money was the real prize, and she was sure they still had all of it. "Well," Peterson said, standing with a practiced air of magnanimity, "it seems my client was mistaken, driven to suspicion by the emotional turmoil of a failing marriage. He will, of course, meet his obligations to the child. Now, if that concludes this matter, we can move on to the equitable distribution of assets." He was trying to seize control, to minimize the loss, and steer the conversation back to his territory. But Judge Atwood held up a hand, silencing him. "We are not concluded, Mr. Peterson. Sit down." The judge's tone was sharp, commanding, and Peterson sat abruptly, looking stunned. She then picked up the second envelope. This one was thicker, containing a more complex report. The air in the room, which had momentarily relaxed, grew tense once more. Daniel's eyes were locked on that envelope, a new kind of fear dawning in their depths. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it was a weapon that had been aimed at him, and the judge was about to pull the trigger. This court also has the results of a Y chromosome short tandem repeat analysis, Judge Atwood announced, her voice dropping slightly, taking on a gravitas that commanded every ounce of attention in the room. This test was performed to compare the genetic lineage of Mr. Daniel Collins with biological tissue belonging to his late father, Mr. Arthur Collins, obtained from the archives of St. Jude's Medical Center. Peterson shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object. This is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. This is a private family matter. Your objection is noted and overruled, Mr. Peterson, the judge said, her eyes flashing with impatience. Your client made lineage the cornerstone of his argument. He opened this door. The court is now simply walking through it. Please sit down, or I will have you removed for contempt. Peterson, pale and shaken, sank back into his chair. Daniel was no longer trying to hide his agitation. He was staring at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. What could it possibly say? What did it matter he was a Collins? He had always been a Collins. It was the only truth he had ever known. Judge Atwood tore open the seal. She unfolded the multi-page report, her eyes scanning the technical language and charts. The silence in the courtroom was now so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical pressure. Jessica held her breath, her heart pounding a heavy, steady rhythm against her ribs. This was it. The foundation. After what felt like an eternity, the judge looked up. She did not look at Jessica or the lawyers. She looked directly and with an expression of cold pity at Daniel Collins. The Y chromosome is passed directly from father to son, with very little mutation, creating a clear and undeniable genetic fingerprint of a paternal line. She explained, her voice now clinical, as if she were a professor delivering a lecture. The analysis compared 23 markers on the Y chromosome from the sample of Arthur Collins and the sample of Daniel Collins. She paused, letting the weight of her next words gather. Of the 23 markers compared, there are 0 matches. For a heartbeat, the words didn't seem to register. 0 matches. The phrase hung in the dead air of the courtroom, an abstract scientific statement devoid of context. Then the meaning crashed down with the force of a tidal wave. A loud, disbelieving gasp came from the gallery. It was Victoria. Her face, moments before a mask of bored superiority, was now a canvas of utter shock. Her perfectly painted lips were parted in a silent, "Oh," her eyes wide with horrified comprehension. Daniel Collins simply stared. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pallid sheen. He looked at the judge, then at his lawyer, then at Jessica. His expression one of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. It was the look of a man who had been told the sky was green, that gravity no longer existed. The fundamental law of his universe had just been repealed. That's impossible," he stammered the words, catching in his throat. He half rose from his chair, pointing a trembling finger at the bench. "That test is wrong. It's fraudulent. She did this." His finger swiveled to point at Jessica. "Sit down, Mr. Collins." Judge Atwood's voice was like the crack of a whip. "This test was court-ordered, performed by a state-certified lab with an unbroken chain of custody. The results are scientifically irrefutable. You are not the biological son of Arthur Collins." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic buzz of whispers. Reporters were scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Robert Peterson looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his face ashen, his slick confidence completely stripped away. He was shuffling through his papers, looking for a script, a procedure for a situation this bizarre, and finding nothing. What What does this mean? Daniel asked, his voice now small, childlike. Olivia Chen stood, her demeanor poised and lethal. I can explain what it means, Your Honor. All eyes turned to her. It means, Your Honor, that Mr. Collins has potentially committed fraud on a massive scale. Olivia began, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. Upon the death of Arthur Collins, my client's husband inherited the entirety of Collins & Son Properties, as well as control of the Collins Family Heritage Trust, a fund valued at over $200 million. I have a copy of the trust's charter right here. She produced a document and placed it on the prosecutor's lectern. Article 3, Section 2 is very specific. The trust and all its assets, including the controlling shares of the company, are to be passed down through direct, verifiable, biological male lineage. It was a document written by a man obsessed with his own bloodline. She turned to face Daniel, her eyes locking onto his. It means, Mr. Collins, that for the last 4 years you have been controlling a company and a fortune to which you have absolutely no legal claim. It means every salary you've drawn, every bonus you've been paid, every asset you've acquired using that wealth has been done under false pretenses. The very foundation of your life is a lie. The word hung in the air, lie. The same word Eleanor had whispered to Jessica at the funeral. Victoria Beaumont stood up abruptly. The intricate web of her future, the mansions, the yachts, the endless river of money was not just fraying. It was being incinerated before her eyes. The man she had attached herself to was not the powerful scion of an old money dynasty. He was a fraud, an imposter. Her face, once a picture of smug beauty, twisted into an ugly snarl of rage and betrayal. She looked at Daniel not with sympathy, but with pure, venomous hatred. You lied to me, she hissed, her voice loud enough to carry through the stunned courtroom. You told me you owned everything. You told me she would be left with nothing. Daniel, still reeling, turned to her, his expression pleading. Tori, I didn't know. Don't you Tori me, she spat, her voice dripping with disgust. She grabbed her designer handbag from the bench. You are nothing. You have nothing. Without a backward glance, she turned and stormed towards the exit, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the marble floor. She shoved her way past a reporter trying to ask her a question and burst through the courtroom doors, slamming them shut behind her. The performance was over. The star actress had walked out the moment she realized her leading man wasn't going to be paid. The spectacle of her exit seemed to finally break Daniel's catatonic state. The bewilderment in his eyes was replaced by a terrifying, all-consuming rage. This was his ultimate nightmare: public humiliation, the loss of control. Everything was being taken from him. His head snapped toward Jessica, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated malice. He saw her not as the mother of his child, or the woman he once promised to love, but as the architect of his ruin. You! He seethed the word a venomous dart. You did this, you conniving bitch! You dug all this up to destroy me! He lunged forward, his hands outstretched as if to grab her, to physically attack her. Instantly, 2 burly bailiffs who had been watching the scene unfold moved in, intercepting him. They each grabbed an arm, their grips like iron vices. That's enough, Mr. Collins, one of them said, his voice a low growl. Daniel struggled against them, his expensive suit wrinkling, his face contorted in a mask of fury. Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? The question, once a threat, was now just pathetic. The entire room knew the answer: nobody. Mr. Collins, if you do not compose yourself, I will have you held in contempt, and you will spend the night in a jail cell to think about your actions. Judge Atwood warned, her voice glacial. Your outburst here in front of your pregnant, estranged wife has been noted by the court. The fight seemed to drain out of Daniel all at once. He went limp in the bailiff's grasp, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat. They escorted him back to his chair, where he collapsed, burying his face in his hands. The great Daniel Collins, CEO and titan of industry, was weeping like a broken child. Judge Atwood surveyed the wreckage of the man's life with a stern, unwavering gaze. She looked at the abandoned lawyer's table, the empty chair in the gallery where the mistress had been, and the shell of a man who had just lost everything. Then her eyes settled on Jessica. For the first time, Jessica saw something other than judicial impartiality in the judge's expression. It was a look of profound woman-to-woman understanding and perhaps a quiet, steely respect. "Well, Ms. Chen," Judge Atwood said, her voice returning to its formal cadence, though the undertone was unmistakable. "It appears the entire financial landscape of this case has fundamentally changed. The matter of marital assets seems to be far more complex than we initially thought." Olivia Chen gave a small, grim smile. "Indeed, Your Honor, indeed." The unraveling of Daniel Collins was swift and total. The Collins Family Heritage Trust sued him for fraud. The board of Collins & Son fired him, citing catastrophic reputational damage. And the media turned him into a citywide cautionary tale of greed and deception. Stripped of his name, his fortune, and his power, the man who once commanded boardrooms became a social pariah buried under a mountain of legal debt. The divorce settlement was a stunning reversal of fortune. The $15 million Daniel had tried to hide with Victoria was awarded entirely to Jessica. She also kept the marital home free and clear. Daniel was left with nothing but court-ordered child support payments for the son he had tried to disown, a permanent monthly reminder of his ultimate failure. A few months later, Jessica gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Andrew. He was a new beginning, a clean slate. She sold the cold glass house filled with ghosts, and with a portion of her settlement bought a wind-swept piece of land overlooking the ocean. There she did what she was always meant to do. She built. She founded her own small, successful architectural firm, naming it J. Collins & Son. A quiet reclamation of the name, now imbued with honesty and her own hard-won strength. Her first project was her own home, a warm structure of wood and stone designed not to impress but to nurture. Looking out at the steady ocean waves from the home she had created, holding the son she had fought for Jessica, felt a profound peace. She had been tested in the most brutal of ways, her life demolished by a man living a lie. But from the ruins, she had emerged not as a victim, but as an architect, building a new life on the only foundation that truly mattered, the truth. Jessica's story is a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, when the world seems to have turned against us, we possess a strength we never knew we had. It's a story about how one woman pushed to the absolute brink used the truth, not just as a shield, but as a sword, dismantling an empire of lies to build a new life of honesty and hope for her and her son. Her journey from a collapsing victim in a hostile courtroom to the master of her own destiny is a testament to resilience and the ultimate power of integrity. If her incredible fight for justice and a new beginning moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a story of hope and the triumph of truth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of the judge's final ruling? Let us know in the comments below.